How do the Bodhisattvas reconcile the saying that Samsara is Nirvana, when there is also suffering in the world? If Nirvana is peace, then how can that peace include suffering? The more we look to attainment in the future, or perfection, or the ideal in the future, the less satisfied we therefore become with the present. Those two things are a pair of opposites, present and future, and therefore they're interlinked. In that way, they become codependent in that way. So the samsara is nirvana, and nirvana is samsara, was the Mahayana's way of short-circuiting that problem. If we're cultivating awareness to see things as they really are, then we're cultivating seeing things as they really are now, not in the future. So attainment happens now, or it doesn't happen at all. Realization happens now, or it doesn't happen at all. And so that brings us back into the present. However, it seems to go a little bit further. It seems to be saying that this very place is nirvana, and this is put in many ways. The Zen masters say, if you're looking for the lotus land of Amida Buddha, then you find it right here now. It's not in the West, and it's not anywhere else. It's not above or below. It's exactly here. And now, and is to be realized. And so, of course, that then has to take into account that the fact that the world is full of suffering, and in that case, how can this be nirvana? And this is if you like is a great koan for us, because the teachings are very clear on this point, that this is in fact the case, and yet we are not being asked to deny the reality of the world, and that includes the suffering of the world, which the Buddha himself acknowledges in the very first of the First Noble Truths, that living entails suffering. So how can that be nirvana and suffering at the same time? How can it be samsara and nirvana at one and the same time? And in fact, iconographically, this is seen in the Wheel of Life, of course, as well. Now, in many of the Wheels of Life, not in all of them, and there are variations, but the one that I'm referring to for this are where the 6 realms, those 6 realms that I've mentioned, the gods and the fighting demons and animals, humans, and so on, when you see them pictured on the Wheel of Life, you will often see a little circle in each realm within which stands a figure, and that figure is a bodhisattva, and that is the bodhisattva of that realm. Now, we remember that the bodhisattva, sometimes these are considered Buddhist saints. I think a little bit more, they're seen as the activities of the Buddha in the world, that when we dedicate ourselves to the path of the bodhisattva, then we are cultivating in our being the activity of the Buddha in the world. In this case, the Buddha nature, the heart Buddha. And so it's very clear. And this samsara is nirvana, of course, ties in with that whole notion that the bodhisattvas do not enter fully into nirvana, although they've attained the wisdom, and also they have extinguished the passions as well, but they also maintain a foothold in the world to be of assistance to all sentient beings. This is the first of the four bodhisattva vows, and a lot is made of this, in the teachings. The fact that bodhisattvas, who, if you like, embody nirvana within their own being, they have one foot there too, but they also have one foot in the world. So they actually act as this sort of bridge. And it's quite interesting that if you look at a lot of statues, and you can go and look at this on the internet, if you look at some of the statues of the bodhisattvas, you can see that the male bodhisattvas and the female bodhisattvas stand and look very similar. There's there is a sort of fluidity to gender, to use the modern saying of them. Even if you look at, say, for example, Avalokiteshvara and some of the others, Avalokiteshvara is a male Bodhisattva, though he has female emanations or female guises too. But even he's not sort of standing square. One hip is higher than the other. There is a deliberate feminization of him. And this iconographically, this bringing together is very similar to the notion in Western alchemy, for example, of the hermaphrodite, the one who contains within both sexes, the opposites. And I think this is what's being indicated here with the gender of the bodhisattvas as well, that they contain within themselves this the different realms. They unite the opposites within themselves. They unite both samsara and nirvana within themselves. And, as I said, a lot is actually made of this. I remember Venerable Myokyoni when she was training in Japan in the early days, and she was struggling quite a lot with the Japanese. And so before she would listen to the Teisho by her teacher, Sesso Roshi, she would spend the day before translating the text that he was going to be talking on. And at this point he was looking at the record of Rinzai, and there's a passage in the record of Rinzai where Master Rinzai describes the powers of what's called the man of the way, we could say the Bodhisattva, that the Bodhisattva can go into the wilderness without being molested by animals, can enter fire without being burnt, and so on. And it finishes this litany by saying, and can even enter the 3 deepest hells as if they were a fairground. And, Myokyoni thought, that's pretty callous, really, because, if you take the hells seriously, then the hells represents the very real suffering, beings who are really tormented and suffering very much. And, she thought, gosh, even in Zen, there's a sort of over-the-topness about this that didn't really sort of sit right with her. And so she was interested to see what Sesso Roshi would make of this. And he picked it up straight away and said, if you read this straight through, on the surface, you would think this comes over as really quite callous of Master Rinzai to say this. But actually, he said, if you look and see, you can see that, in fact, if the bodhisattvas did not have that ability to be able to enter the 3 deepest hells in this way, then they would get caught up with the suffering there. And they themselves would begin to suffer. And by entering into the 3 deepest hells, they would, in effect, increase the sum total of suffering in the world in this way. That is why it's important that they are able to maintain this attitude, even in the midst of suffering. And in that way, they're in their best place to be of assistance to other beings. So this is the ideal. So when we're talking at samsara as nirvana, if we imagine, nirvana is the world that contains samsara, if you like. That's not quite accurate, but that nirvana goes deeper than samsara, and that a shift is required in order not to get caught up with samsara, and thus to be in a place to be able to be of assistance to all beings. And so what this really concretely points to is about not getting caught up with the passions, not being carried away by the passions. We all have the passions and we all experience them, but there's a difference between experiencing them in our physical form and containing them, and then being carried off by them.